Kristen Atchison here. We're talking about sensation and perception. Today we're talking about the body senses. So people think as touch as being one single sense, but it's really actually a lot more. So our tactile senses really include various different things, one of which is touch, which is tactile perception. This is one of those mechanoreceptors that we talked about. So through those pressure changes, we will interpret a soft touch, we'll interpret a rough touch, these sorts of things. Other ways that we include in our tactile senses and our body senses are thermoreception. This is our ability to tell temperature, tell something that's hot from something that's cold. Another one we talk about is pain, which is nociception. Pain we'll actually talk about in a little bit more detail in this lecture. We won't touch on shape perception. So we talked about shape in terms of vision, how you can determine shape through visual cues, but you can determine shape through physical cues as well, through these mechanoreceptors and haptic perception. Again, we won't really touch on that, but this is another piece of those tactile senses. We also have proprioception, or our kinesthetic senses, that tell us where our body is in space. So I am really clumsy, and I frequently run into things and hit my head on things and come up with strange bruises, and I'm like, how did this happen? It happened partially because I don't have great proprioception. I don't have great information about where my body is in space. And so I run into things because I don't know that my leg is there. I didn't know that my head stopped here instead of there, and I bumped into something. So those kinesthetic senses, includes proprioception, where our body is in space. And the last one is our body balance or speed. And this is really done by your vestibular system. So when we talked about the ear, we had the image of the ear and we left off. We didn't really talk about one little section in our inner ear, and that is our vestibular system. We have semicircular canals that are inside of our ear, and they give us cues about how fast our body's going, our balance. So when you get motion sickness, that's a reaction of your vestibular system. People with vertigo, that's a reaction of their vestibular system in their inner ear. So again, when we talk about touch as being the fifth sense, it's really a lot more than just touch. There's all these other components, all these other tactile senses that are included. So in terms of touch, we have the 2-point threshold. Now, we did a demonstration of this in class, so this should be somewhat familiar to you already. But the 2-point threshold really assesses the spatial resolution of different parts of your body for mechanoreceptors, okay? I know, that was a big mouthful, right? So mechanoreceptors are, again, how we determine touch, and it's the idea that there are parts of our body that have higher density of these mechanoreceptors than other parts of our body. So the tips of your fingers. So on this graph, the things that have the lowest lines really have high spatial resolution because we have more mechanoreceptors than things that have the longer graphs. Okay, so our fingers have really good spatial resolution. Our mouth and our lips have really good spatial resolution. Our forehead, not as much, but it's our forehead still better than like our calf or our forearm. So when you did that 2-point threshold, if you probably were able to tell differences between points better on your fingers than you were on your forearm. And that's because of this spatial resolution. Now, there's one area of the body that they have left off here, and that is the genitalia. The genitalia are also going to have a high space resolution. And what's really interesting about this is this also corresponds to the number of neurons and the amount of brain region that these body parts take up. So we're really talking about not only having more receptors, but having more brain space taken up by these receptors. So again, we'll have different sensitivity to touch in different parts of our bodies based on this spatial resolution. Okay, we're going to move on to pain. So pain is the body's way of telling the individual that something's gone wrong. We see that there are more infections and more injuries when there are no warnings or limited warnings of pain. So people with diabetes often can have amputations and they can lose limbs. Part of that has to do with they have reduced sensitivity in their extremities because of blood flow. Okay, so they have reduced sensitivity, say, in their foot. And so if they have an injury on their foot, it's a lot harder for them to realize that they have that injury on their foot and determine that there's an infection and treat the infection in a timely manner. There's other things contributing to that as well, but that's one of the pieces of it. They don't have as much of a warning system, that pain system, because of the neuropathy in their extremities. And so they're more likely to have an infection or an injury there that isn't properly treated and results in an amputation. Pain reflects both bottom up and top down cognition. So pain is both like what is physically coming in from the sensory receptions, what's physically being transduced, but also our perception of it. So if you've ever been around a small kid that, hurts themselves and they are crying profusely, and a kiss can make it better, that tells you the effect of top-down cognition on pain, okay? If you take an Advil and immediately you start to feel better, that is that top-down effect on pain. So we like to talk about pain as a biopsychosocial event. It involves biological influences, it involves psychological influences, and it involves sociocultural influences. We're going to talk about each of those. So in terms of biological influences, pain's not just triggered by one kind of stimulus. There are a number of different kinds of stimulus that can cause pain. We can have pain that's caused by pressure, so like a mechanoreceptor. We can have pain that's caused by temperature, like a thermoreceptor. We can have pain that's caused by chemical receptors. So we have lots of different kinds of stimulus, bright lights, that can result in this painful response. Pain signals are not processed by specialized receptors. There are sensory receptors called nociceptors that detect hurtful temperatures, pressures, and chemicals, but they're not a special kind of sensory receptor like we have with a rod versus a cone. So we do have these sensory receptors, but they're not specialty ones. They're ones that already work in their kind of given system. So in their chemical system, in their mechanoreceptor system, in their thermoreceptive system. And the experience of our pain really depends on inherited genes and physical characteristics. So all of these are those biology pieces of it. So again, somebody who's diabetic, who has neuropathy, they have kind of deadened nerves in their extremities. And so that's a biological influence that's having them experience less pain. There's also different people who experience pain differently because of genetic reasons. And sometimes the brain can misinterpret signals and it can create pain. So we can kind of misinterpret something that comes in from those sensory receptors, and that can create this experience of pain. The psychological influence of pain, selective attention is 100% one of them, right? So if you hurt yourself and you think about it, it hurts way more than if you're not thinking about it. You can kind of forget about it by that focus of attention or not. Individuals can also seem to edit their memories of pain. One of the most popular ones that you hear discussed is childbirth, that people don't necessarily remember the pain in the same way that it actually happened. Pain is experienced may not be the pain that's remembered. This can be edited either way. We can make things more painful than they were, and we can make things less painful than they were. My daughter is famous at editing her pain responses to a shot. You would think someone was literally cutting off her arm in the way she talks about how bad shots hurt. And so again, this pain experienced, which we've all had a shot, and they're not comfortable by any shape of the imagination, are also not excruciatingly painful the way that her memory has been edited. So those are those psychological influences of pain, our attention and how we think about pain, whether we think something's going to be painful or not, is going to affect it. If we tell you something's going to hurt, it's going to hurt a lot more than if we tell you it's not going to hurt. And so these are, again, those psychological influences that affect how we interpret pain. The last one that I'm going to talk about is the social cultural influence of pain. So pain is a product of our attention, which we talked about, that psychological feature, our expectations, that psychological feature, but also our culture, okay? So different cultures have different rules depending on how pain should be experienced, depending on social information, social situations, and cultural traditions. So different cultures have different rules on experiencing pain. Our culture tends to not want you to experience large amounts of pain and talk about it in social situations. So people kind of talk about it less and try and experience it less in a social situation than they would on their own. So this is that social cultural piece of it. Humans feel more pain when they see someone else experiencing pain. So this is that social piece of it. If you see somebody in pain, like, it feels bad. Like, you could almost feel that yourself. If somebody falls and you hear that big crunch, you can kind of feel that. That's that social cultural version of pain. I know the other day one of you bumped into a table in class and I said, "Oh, I felt that. That hurt me because of the loud noise." That's that social cultural influence of pain. I didn't get hit. I was standing by myself over waiting for papers to get picked up. But again, that's that piece of it that affects how we interpret pain. This ends our conversation about body senses. Thanks.